Meet my forcefully declared vintage gaming rig of 2019 fame.
I mean, it has a 6-core Ryzen 5, 48GB of RAM, SSDs and a powerhouse of a graphics card in it. But yet, it was declared obsolete by Microsoft saying, "Dude, your CPU is too old. Go get buying a new PC that goes with Windows 11. But not with me. I've organized some upgrade components to pull this straight, and there will be some surprises along the way. I can feel it.
I love old computers. I love to collect them. I love to fix them. I'm the vintage collector, and these are my stories. So in order to run Windows 11 on this machine, I must replace the current Ryzen 5 1600X by a Ryzen 9 3900X. Sure, that's not the most modern CPU either, but besides the 3950X, the best I can put into that main board. And the price for a used CPU was really low, so I thought to pursue this route before buying an all-new setup. I also organized an M2 SSD with 1TB of storage capacity, as my current 128GB boot drive is full and won't have enough room for upgrading. Then there's some thermal grease, and I throw in some random USB key for performing the BIOS upgrade. And this will be literally the first thing I'm doing, as this is a prerequisite for running the Ryzen 9 3900X with this mainboard. So I'll be carrying out the BIOS upgrade, after which I'm setting it to use RAID mode again, as I had my hard drives configured in RAID mode before. But the thing is, no matter how often I tried, the BIOS would always be stuck on booting up, throwing me directly back into the BIOS, though never stating an actual error message. And it took me a while to figure out that even when activating the RAID devices, they would always fall back to being deactivated after the next reboot. I also went down to booting into Linux, which, no surprise, didn't show me the logical disk drives. Eventually, I switched on the AHCI mode in the BIOS, which at least gave me access to the disks from Linux. So before tampering around with it any further, I was taking a backup using PartImage. So I was then doing some investigation, and while the original BIOS from the download page contained some minimalistic changelog, I did only find the ultimate truth on a MSI blog page from 2019, stating this: RAID will be supported in the next BIOS update for all older AM4 motherboards, except those with an A320 chipset. There was never a BIOS released after this beta version, so that explains a lot already why it really doesn't want to boot off the RAID.
May I comment on that? If the RAID functionality was not included anymore in the BIOS, why offer the option to configure it anyway then? And shouldn't it be mentioned in the release notes as well, for being absent?
Yeah, maybe, but anyway. So once my backup was complete, I tried booting into Windows 10 anyway, though in AHCI mode instead of RAID mode. However, I'd be getting a blue screen with the dreaded inaccessible boot device message. No surprise, as Windows tried booting off the RAID and couldn't figure out how to boot off the AHCI disk drive instead. I had then been doing some online investigation how to motivate Windows to use AHCI instead. The thing is though, that I couldn't really access the system's recovery console, as obviously I didn't have the administrator's password. I must confess, I never went down the route of looking into Windows 10 too much, as I really was using it from a blunt user perspective. But I honestly don't remember setting an administrator password for this system, as I think only a user account was created during the initial setup, and the account's password wouldn't be reflected to the administrator account then. I'll be looking into this one later again. There were other ways mentioned how you can post-convert a Windows 10 into a non-RAID mode, however all of them still assumed a still running system, which I didn't have at this time. Alright, so maybe let's try the obvious thing, restoring the previous BIOS version. But that proved already difficult, as no backup was taken during the A-flash sequence. So let's get it from the MSI download page. No big deal, huh? But look, the version I used, the 7A32V1L, was missing. Of course, I could go with the previous version, but I totally didn't want to do any further experiments. So after a lot of investigation, which didn't really get me to the solution, I eventually had this obscure idea. I simply took the download URL of a previous version, manually changing the file name to what I believe to be the 7A32V1L version. And surprisingly enough, it worked, and I actually got the BIOS version I had before. So in the end, it was just not properly linked onto the download portal. But then, when trying to flash the previous version, I got this. For providing better BIOS functionality and quality, the system will not allow to restore BIOS with older version after flashing this target BIOS. Great. Now what? So I produce now another kind of a brick.
Yeah, you seem to have the lucky strike on that topic.
Ah, shut up already. My journey of investigation then eventually led me to the MSI user forums, where there was this other thread about the non-official EFI flash utility, though it was explicitly mentioned that it wouldn't work with my Carbon Gaming X370 board. What a bummer. But then I read through the entire thread anyway, and someone actually posted a success message for reflashing the same board with an earlier BIOS release. Well, I didn't have much to lose, and so I went to download the flash utility onto a USB key. I sweat blood and tears, but then I took a deep breath and...
You do remember what happened last time, do you?
Yeah, but look, it all looks good so far, not reporting any errors at all. Hold your breath, I'm power cycling it now. Look at this, it comes back up with the previous BIOS version. Yes! And now also the RAID firmware loads up, so Windows should start up now. And it does. Well, that's great. So now, I will follow one of these tutorials I found earlier to switch the system to AHCI mode. For this, I need to first enable the minimal safe boot recovery console using the bcd edit command as shown. This would instruct Windows to boot into safe mode by default. I then went into the BIOS to disable RAID in favor to the AHCI mode. Windows now happily booted up into safe mode and had the boot device driver successfully reinstalled. Accordingly, I removed again the safe boot configuration using bcd edit afterwards and powered down the system. I then quickly pulled the GPU in order to access the M2 slot to install the new SSD. And after booting up again and seeing the new 1TB SSD properly detected, the question came how to clone the Windows installation over to the new drive. I was thinking about doing it using Linux and Park Clone, but a friend told me that I could try AHCI Backup Professional as this could clone full systems. Now, I need to emphasize that I'm in no way sponsored or a referee of AHCI, and the product is a paid product, which comes with a limited trial mode, which unfortunately doesn't let you do clones of your system. But apparently, AHCI has released a free license key valid for 1 year just a few days ago. And before I'm going for alternate path, maybe it's good enough for a one-off operation. So I installed it using the free license key and let it run. Eventually it would complete, so I took the system down and disconnected the original boot drive. And the entire cloning obviously went fine, leaving me with a new 1TB M2 SSD as a boot drive, and it was just booting up fine. Before I go for further ventures, I quickly fired up the system management console. Some stomach feeling told me to set the local administrator account password. And what about the PC integrity check? It would still complain at this point about two things. I didn't swap the CPU yet, and the system should be switched to secure boot mode. So I switched everything over in the BIOS, enabled the TPM and also secured boot. Though I'd always end up in a reboot loop, as the system would always drop me back into the BIOS. I ultimately reverted everything back so I could boot up again. I had this random thought and saw myself confirmed when opening up Disk Manager in Windows. In order to use Secure Boot, which implies booting via EFI, it requires a GPT partitioned hard drive. And as we can see here, the disk is MBR partitioned, as Disk Manager has the option to convert it to a GPT partition, although it's disabled.
You're not actually thinking about converting this to GPT now, are you?
Yes, I am.
It looks to me like you're always going the challenging path.
I don't have much to lose here. If it fails, I can restore the backup, and in a worst case, I simply reinstall everything from scratch. So at first, I run the MBR to GPT utility with the validate argument, and I have tried to verify disk 0. Though that, as well as a direct attempt for conversion, failed right away. I had to read up what Microsoft expects for a typical EFI partitioning scheme. There, I noticed that there is some unallocated disk space needed for MBR to GPT to work. So I made the C partition a bit smaller, taking away some 1 GB. Then I reran MBR to GPT both with the validate argument but also the convert command. As I didn't do this from save mode, I had to also provide the /allow full OS argument to force Windows into converting the partition. And this, surprisingly enough, worked, and after changing the BIOS settings again into using Secure Boot, the system booted happily into Windows 10 from the new GPT partitioned disk drive. And this time over, the PC integrity check was just complaining about the unsupported CPU, but no longer about the now enabled Secure Boot and TPM support. At this point, I went back into the BIOS, upgrading it again to the latest beta version in order to support the Ryzen 9 3900X CPU. But before I swapped the CPU, I booted up into Windows using the new BIOS, and this time over, everything just went fine. So after removing the cooler and the current CPU, I quickly went over the replacement CPU to clean it, because this is actually not a brand new CPU, but a previously used one that I got for a fraction of the original street price. Less to say, a fraction of the still current 550 Swiss francs that the new boxed unit still is being asked for today. I'd then plug in the replacement CPU, also applying some thermal grease before reinstalling the CPU cooler. And then rebooting into Windows 10, I got a whopping 12 cores and 24 logical CPUs overall, and guess what? The PC integrity check finally approved my system as now being compatible and thus eligible to install Windows 11. The installation then began and ran through without any hassles. The problems only started when trying to log in after the upgrade. My personal user account would not be allowed to log in anymore. I was trying several times without any success before trying the local administrator account. Thank God I had set the local password before, because that was what was now saving me. Logging in as the local administrator at least allowed me now to gain access to the system.
But you should have been able to regain access using your Microsoft account.
Well, if I had been using a Microsoft account, then probably yes, but...
Oh my, don't tell me you were doing your own thing again.
I actually was, yes. Since I have many systems, I'm using my Synology NAS as a central authentication server, also acting as an anti-domain server. And this was obviously working fine up and until Windows 10. My research though showed that the anti-domain compatibility to Samba and Synology directory server is broken since Windows 11 22H2 release, requiring either software changes on the Synology NAS or hackery on Windows itself. But my Synology is actually that old that it doesn't receive any patches anymore. I could try to set up a VM using Xpinology running DSM-7 to overcome this limitation using proper fixes, but this leads too far for the current video. And I simply didn't want to tamper around with the registry settings on Windows 11 at this point either, because that would definitely lead into future issues as well. So I pulled the plug on the Active Directory integration at the time, reconfiguring my machine into local mode. So much so about the software trickery, but there was one more thing to do. Here you see my dated Thermaltake Shark case, which carries my gaming rig since like 2005 or so, and sees the interior swapped every few years. On the front door there's that one single blue LED which is broken since years. And since I'm working on this machine already, it's exactly the right time to replace it, so let's do a little case mod. My idea is to build a small carrier plate into which I'm integrating the 3 cyan colored LEDs. I'm also taking the opportunity to rebuild the Molex connectors for both the main case fan and the new LEDs. I never liked these 2 daisy-chained Molex connectors anyway, therefore I'm cutting the plugs away and build a single connector. I'm using these inline connectors to create the new joints to the Molex plug. On the far end of the LED strand there was also an inline resistor that I had to remove, as the original LED was hooked up to the 5V lead. But as I'm hooking up 3 LEDs in a row, I rewired the strand to the 12V rail in the previous step. And this is what it eventually looked like after the repair.
Oh my, this was a hard fight. I tell you, with the best intentions of switching from RAID to AHCI mode anyways, I went straight to update the BIOS, because I needed this anyway for the new CPU. And not only would the RAID mode not work anymore with the new BIOS, but it wouldn't let me downgrade it to the last known good version. So I had to resort to an unofficial downgrading utility. I sweat blood and tears when I bricked the machine, reminding me of the ill fate I just had with the Cobalt Network's Rack 3 server some days ago. Of course, my motivation was not to reinstall everything from scratch, but to just upgrade to Windows 11 straight away. But in the end, with all the extra time I had to invest, I could have gone that route just anyway and reinstalled from scratch, as it would have taken about the same time. At least it's working now again, so I can finally turn to a game.
I'm the Vintage Collector, and this was my story. Thanks for watching,
And see you next time. And now, I'm gonna play. If you check out this channel's community tab, you'll find some polls on potential upcoming videos. You're very welcome to upvote on upcoming topics or drop in new ones you'd like me to chase down.